بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وآله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي. ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر أولياءك في غزة. اللهم انتقم من الذين يقاتلون أولياءك في غزة ويقتلون الأبرياء والمستضعفين والرجال والنساء والأطفال. اللهم شتت شملهم، اللهم مزق جمعهم، اللهم خرب بيوتهم، اللهم دمر ديارهم، اللهم زلزل أقدامهم وانزل بهم بأسك الذي لا ترده عن القوم المجرمين. اللهم لا ترفع لهم راية ولا تحقق لهم غاية واجعلهم للعالمين عبرة وآية. اللهم انصر أولياءك في غزة وفي كل مكان. اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في غزة وفي كل مكان. اللهم نفس كربنا وكربهم وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والتف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا أكرم الأكرمين. وصلى وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين. We are still looking at Allama Iqbal's critique of cosmological argument. We had stopped here yesterday. So starting from here, the argument really tries to reach the infinite by merely negating the finite. So according to Iqbal, the cosmological argument doesn't have a positive conception of infinity. This argument or this critique doesn't apply to religious scholasticism or kalam, which uses cosmological argument and other argument to establish the existence of God, because even though in kalam at least they say that we are only dealing with reason, we are not going to rely on revealed truths. So they are bracketing them for the sake of ilm al-kalam. For the sake of argument in this context. But the conception is still there. So they have bracketed it, not because they have any doubt about that, or they don't have their own reason for accepting what they have accepted, but because their opponent doesn't believe in revelation as a source. That's why they are relying on something which is presumably common among them and their opponent. So a practitioner of ilm al-kalam or scholasticism has a positive conception of God, which we are calling here infinite according to their or corresponding to their vocabulary. So this argument doesn't apply to such a practitioner of cosmological argument, but it does apply to a pure philosophical argument at pure philosophical plane. And the critique is this: cosmological argument doesn't have any positive conception of infinite, And if they have a positive conception of infinite, that is not part of this argument. So what they are arriving at this positive conception only through negating finite. So finite is in front of us, and we are negating finite. So infinite is everything, finite is not. So what is infinite? Infinite is what is not finite. So we are just negating what we are observing. And this is clear, more clear or clearer in German language, for example. Or in other language as well. For example, in Arabic and Persian and Urdu. So in English, finite and infinite. I mean, if we go to etymology, it will become clearer. But in German language, for example, infinite is un, which is basically what English an is. In lich or lichkeit. So that is infinity. And from there you get finite is just endlich. I didn't put end there. So this kite is like T in English, so that become infinite. And if you take out un, which is a negation term, then you have Endlichkeit. That is finitude. You don't say finity in English, so and finite is just endlich, something which has end or absences of an end, because end or limit in German is ende, like English. So English is the Germanic language, so a lot of vocabulary just from there. So in there it is clear that you get infinite just by negating. You are just putting. So real thing is finite. You have a positive conception of finite because you can see it. And the same is true for example, Arabic, Persian, and so mahdud in Urdu, Arabic, Persian mean limited or finite, or غير محدود in Urdu and Persian in infinite. So you just put غير, which just mean on. In Arabic, لا محدود. Obviously غير is also Arabic word, but in this context I think it's more common to use لا محدود or لا منتهى. Although for infinite there are more in Urdu, Arabic, and Persian more positive terms as well, like abad. But then you can make abad ghair abadi. So from there you actually, from infinite you are making finite. But that doesn't mean you have that's a more positive conception of infinity anyway. What was I going to say? Okay, so that's what Iqbal is saying. Now, although infinite in English language is not clear or obvious, the negative nature of infinite, but if you go to its Latin roots, so finite is from finis, which does mean boundary and limit, and in is just like on, so it's without boundary, without terminal point, without ending, without limit, without end. So the same thing as German language there, but in English, from infinite, if you don't know the etymology, it's not clear. Although if they were to use unlimited, which is English, then that would be more clear, but it's not common to use unlimited in this context. Okay, so what is Iqbal saying? Iqbal is saying is that the argument really tries to reach the finite by merely negating, which is the other way of saying that they don't have any, the argument don't have, cosmological argument don't have any positive conception of infinite. They come at this conception merely by negating what is. And just negating what is doesn't really give you a positive conception of, or at least a fuller conception of what is. Okay, that's his point here. I'm not saying it is devastating for the argument at this point, but it is a point which is to be kept in mind. But infinite reached by contradicting the finite is the false infinite. Okay, but false infinite. And now he goes to, which is neither explain itself nor the finite, which is thus made to stand in opposition to infinite. We talked about that. That's the Hegelian point. The true infinite does not exclude. That's Hegelian. The finite, it embraces the finite without effacing its finitude, and justifies being. The true infinite does not exclude that it embraces the finite without it, and it's explained and justifies its being, the being of finite. Logically speaking, then, the movement from the finite to the infinite is embodied in the cosmology, is quite illegitimate, and argument fails into it. That's just a generic point, but that's the Hegelian point here. Why is infinite of cosmological argument false infinite or bad infinity? Because the Hegelian point at least is that if infinite finite is outside, that's the Hegelian point. That's what Iqbal is making, without providing any argument, but obviously you believe that that much what he has said is the argument for that. If finite is outside, that's they are calling false. Iqbal is calling false finite infinite. Hegel calls it bad infinity, which read infinite which is not finite. They put finite outside infinite, which means finite is a limit to infinite. Because it is standing in opposition to infinite and outside infinite, then that's another way of saying, according to Iqbal and Hegel, that the infinite limited by its opposition to the finite. That's their point, because finite is outside infinite. So it means, according to their own conception, infinite is not infinite, because that's the logical conclusion of your conception of infinite as mere negation of finite. But I think this doesn't apply to a theological argument or religious argument, because they conceive of infinite as a being which creates and sustains the finite. So in that sense, finite is not opposed to infinite in any meaningful sense. And if it is outside infinite, it's outside in the sense that it is its creation and not part of it, but it's not outside in the sense that it can sustain itself without it, or can be without it. So that's the point. Let's go back to the text, because so then he goes on to give us the idea of a true infinite according to Hegel's philosophy. Obviously, that's not part of the critique. It's just providing a new conception without much argument there. The true infinite does not exclude the finite. It embraces the finite without effacing its finitude. But how come? If it is part of infinite, then it is not finite, obviously, and explain and justify its being. It might explain and justify its being, but obviously in Hegel's philosophy, finite and infinites are not opposite, in the sense that finite is just the self-expression of infinite, and the conception of infinite is not that of unending, but rather what all that is. So we'll just give you a bit of explanation of Hegel's idea of positive conception of relationship with finite and infinite, with which Allama Iqbal is working here, and then we'll stop for today. So for Hegel, we have looked at it before in our discussion of Hegel, but for Hegel, the infinite can retain its infinity only if it absorbs the finite as its internal moment, or internal differentiation. So finite is just a self-expression of the infinite. But obviously you would have to come up with a different conception of infinity, where infinity is not just unlimited, it's just all there is, really. So the difference is that for traditional cosmological argument, the relationship between finite and infinite is external. So there are two different things standing in opposition to each other. Like, for example, here I am here and there's a chair here. So we have external. On the other hand, for Hegel, the relationship between Hegel and Iqbal, I guess, the relationship between finite and infinite is internal. So it's like, if you want to think about it organically, it's the relationship between myself and my hand. Or if you want to take an inorganic example, chair and its color, for example. So this is internal relation. So for Hegel and Iqbal, the relationship between finite and infinite is an internal relationship, not an external relationship. So then you don't have that argument, objection which we have against cosmology, the conception of finite and infinite as negation of each other. So now you have finite, but finite is just when we look at infinite from a certain perspective or in isolation from its context. So that's sort of an abstraction, not a reality. For Iqbal, on the other hand, for Hegel at least, on the other hand, finite and infinite are internally related, and true infinite is not infinite because it has no end and it goes on and on. But because it contains finitude or finite within itself at its moment, like my hand contains myself contains my hand, and thus is not limited or restricted by anything outside itself, because there's no outside. So infinite for Hegel is a closed system. There's nothing outside it. That's why it is infinite, not because it has no limits. Anyway, we'll stop here, and next time hopefully we will do teleological argument.